Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hack Summit. For those of you who are in the session now, I'd like to introduce you to a close personal friend of mine, Floyd Marinescu. Floyd Marinescu is the CEO of InfoQ.com and Q Conferences. So InfoQ is one of the top destinations for programmers to learn. It's an architect-level website where programmers can learn from each other about how to program better. So it's a news website for programming, but there's also videos and tutorials on programming there too. And Floyd actually used to work with me. We created the serverside.com together over a decade ago, which at the time was the world's largest Java developer community. So Floyd is an expert on building developer communities. And he basically is one of the most well-networked people who I know with leading architects and programmers around the world. And what I really enjoy talking to Floyd about, and what he's going to talk to you a little bit about today, is kind of how he manages and grows his company in a virtual setting. And I think that's especially relevant for our audience today, because we have an audience with 157 countries being represented. And a lot of you folks might be on virtual teams. You might be communicating using Slack or other systems like that. So Floyd's going to be giving a talk on this topic. And personally, I love speaking with Floyd because he just has a lot of wisdom to impart to the world. He's a very humble man, but is also a developer and is very pure at heart. And so, it's just a privilege to have you here today, Floyd. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks a lot, Ed. So really excited to be presenting for Hack Summit. I think this is a great initiative, and it's really awesome that you guys can be sitting at home watching a conference, and how appropriate it is that this is a talk about running virtual teams and virtual companies. So I'm going to switch over to the slides, and so give me one moment. Okay, so we'll be doing slides from now on. And so this is, again, talk about running virtual teams. And there was a mix-up on the title earlier, so this is the talk I'll be doing today. This talk is not about software development practices or hybrid environments. It's based on my experiences running an all-virtual company that includes a dev team and other departments as well. So it's really about the human stuff. So if this is something that interests you, please continue. And I'm really excited to talk about this because one of my dreams is that the whole world be more virtual. Let people work from small towns. Let companies form and teams form with people across countries. And this is the future. So let's get started. What is team culture? I think culture is the emotional feeling you get working there. So if you want to know what's your culture like, well, how does it feel? Just poll people. What's it like to work here? That's your culture. And there's already a culture in your team, whether you know it or not. You may not even think about culture or think about how the team runs, but if you don't think about it, there is one by default. So the question is, how can we design a good culture? Because it can be designed. There are structures in place. There's things that you can be aware of as a team lead or as someone on your team. And one of the things that I always encourage is to be a culture hacker. So own the feeling you're creating. If you're a team lead, or if you're a member of a team, this is an ethos you can take on if you want the culture of your virtual team to be a lot better. And in my experience, to be a great culture requires a real commitment to structure and practices and mindset that will make people enjoy what they're doing. One of my kind of philosophical bases for everything I'm about to say in this talk comes from the book by Dan Pink. He has one of the top TED Talks on the surprising science of motivation. I highly encourage you to check it out. He says that after salary is considered fair, what really motivates people is a sense of purpose, ongoing learning and mastery, and a sense of autonomy. And mastery, of course, is ongoing learning. And so as a leader, you want to make sure that your team is experiencing this and thinking about all the aspects of the team dynamics from this. And many of you listening are part of bigger companies. Maybe you might think, well, I don't have control over these things. But in fact, you can create your own little subculture within your group that has this experience. And again, everything I'm saying here, although I'm saying it in the context of virtual teams, because I find that it's worked well there, it can obviously apply in any kind of organization or unit. A friend of mine, Dan Mezek, he connotates culture as code. So culture is a shared mental model of normal. So whatever you think normal is, that's your culture. Stories and the stories you tell, the vocabulary that you use, it kind of holds the kind of codes of the culture. This book is another one I recommend if you're a culture hacker, or if you're trying to create a better culture, The 5 Stages of Tribal Culture. In the end of the day, we are all tribal in some sense, and ranging from stage 1 to stage 5. And I'll just talk about a few of these. If you look at stage 2, which is the lower 25% of all organizations worldwide, this is where people can be, it can feel like working there, like feeling like being an apathetic victim, like, oh, my life sucks here. Your relationship to other people is more of separateness. People are kind of quietly sarcastic and resigned. And I've always asked for people to show of hands, and surprisingly, usually a quarter of the room has put up their hands saying that they have worked in companies like this. 49% of all companies are stage 3, where your relationship to other people is, he calls it personal domination, where knowledge is power. You have to win. You know, people are generally competitive with each other, and people are trying to kind of one up and be the best they can. And I'm sure those of you who've worked in large corporations have seen this, and it sucks. Where we want to get to is stage 4, the top 22%, where your relationship to other people is stable partnership. It feels like you're a team. We're great. People are themselves. People seem happy and inspired, and you know, there's shared core values. Generally people act within expectations, and the expectations are kind of codified by your shared values and stuff, and just the general feeling in the company. People don't really let you down. Stage 5, of course, is a dream, innocent wonderment. Some companies can get there, where people are just competing amongst themselves, with their own self to become better. And the company's out there changing the world. But so in my opinion, I don't see really how virtual teams can work well, all virtual teams, if they're stage 3 or below. It'll be difficult. So this talk is about how to get to a stage 4 team in a virtual setting, because I really feel that's what's needed for it to work well. So I think great virtual teams have a lot of these things. I'm going to talk a lot about understanding rhythms as a mindset, metrics, shared dashboards, the social channels. So that's really what the subject of this talk about. It's very much nuts and bolts about the kind of the organizational elements you need to create a smooth running virtual team. And again, the talk is not about any kind of engineering practices or programming. It's about running virtual teams, and that applies in any context. So a bit about me. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of C4Media. We do infoq.com, which Ed introduced. We had 1.8 million unique visitors a month recently, and we publish over 150 new pieces of content a week. It's all programmer content, all really awesome stuff. Like, we see it as our mission is to help software teams adopt new technologies and practices. So if you want to stay ahead of what's going on and find a resource that'll help you bring your development to the next level, InfoQ is for you. And we're in 5 languages. And our conference is QCon, serves over 7,000 people a year. Top engineers from Facebook, Google, Tencent, Globo speak at our events. We're running in 5 countries. Why am I saying this? Just in part to you that this company is already virtual, and it's possible. We're completely distributed. We don't really have an office. And how is that possible? How can we have 70 staff members working, all distributed all over the world? So we just talked about what is culture, and let's get into the how. And hopefully, so let's get into first is mindsets. These are a few things that I've noticed that really make a difference for people that are entering into and trying to understand working virtually. So one thing I like to say is it's an asynchronous world. It's important that we understand that, and this is a term that I can only use with other developers. So it's important to understand synchronous versus asynchronous channels. Being asynchronous, I think, is freaking amazing for not being interrupted, for focusing more on what you need to do at hand. As developers, we all know that interrupts are very costly. And then there's synchronous tools like Slack or Skype channels, like Skype. And it's important, in my opinion, it's much better to shift more towards asynchronous model with lots of intentional meetings where you align synchronously. So I'm actually a bit alarmed at the whole Slack revolution, because it's almost like interrupt culture. I don't see how that's a good thing. I don't know why everyone's demonizing email, because email is a tool for eventual alignment. And what's wrong with that? So I've trained people in my company that when they send an email internally, it should be okay if you don't get an answer even in 48 hours. That way people don't associate stress with email. It's a tool for eventual alignment. And if someone needs a quick answer, then they can IM you on Skype or Slack or whatever. So that way they, say, hey, I just sent this email today to take a look. I need a reply, and that's okay. So we understand that whatever comes through IM is something that's urgent and needs quick follow-up, and whatever is not doesn't. So it kind of reduces stress levels, and we have a better understanding of what to expect. All virtual teams really need to be results oriented, because results is literally all you see, right? You're not in the same office. I think some managers have a very bizarre notion that seeing someone at their desk is somehow a key performance indicator. Like that seems completely ridiculous. Someone could be at their desk on Facebook or doing other things, or they just could be zoned out staring at the screen. So creating a good culture to make a virtual team work is about, which I'll talk about shortly, is about creating the right environment where people have clear goals and metrics and dashboards. So results are very much what everyone sees. Transparency and trust. This is, I've noticed that you have to kind of start with sort of trusting in mind when you're hiring people virtually, and but then transparency has to go alongside. So what I mean by that is, do people have, are people self-reporting? Is there transparency on what the current tasks are in the Kanban or whatever software tools you're using? Is everyone using, are people self-reporting in these tools consistently? That's how you create transparency. It's not by managers asking what's the status, it's by people reporting, self-reporting what's the status, and it's visible to everyone in a consistent manner. And I'll talk about that more shortly with examples. But these two go together. So for me, it's okay to start off by default trusting people, and for people to have that environment. Of course, it feels good; they feel empowered. But then it's a responsibility to create the proper transparencies in the company to foster and to support that trust. Another kind of ism. This comes from Dan Mezek. Everything in life is opt-in. So no matter what you say, no matter what control we think we have, in reality, people have to opt in to whatever they're doing. Even if someone's sitting in a room right in front of you, they might not be opted into even the conversation, right? So I think it's our responsibility, being in teams or in management, to make sure that the environment is engaging and is working for us. If you're a manager, it's your responsibility to make sure the environment is engaging for your team. And if you're a member of the team, then get what you want out of the team. So how can you make it more engaging? Because everything is opt-in. Some of you might be listening to me with half an ear while you're working, and so you're already opted out. Hopefully you're all listening to me with a bit more attention. Another aspect of running virtually is kind of thinking about delegating responsibilities. Give ownership. Right, so nobody wants to sit around and be just kind of told what to do over and over again. Like, for example, don't hire assistants, hire process managers. Offload whole processes to new people. And frankly, the microservices revolution is all about this. It's all about companies like Netflix and Amazon. They've actually created units within the company that own both the design, the dev, and the ops of a distinct unit of work, of a distinct API or process. So they own that process end to end, and that's an example where they've split things in slices that way, and it's about creating process ownership. So people are responsible for it, as opposed to being, let's say, one layer of the stack in a spaghetti architecture where it's kind of chaotic. You don't have a sense of ownership when you have so many dependencies you don't control over, or you're just one part of the stack, and you can't see it through end to end. So this applies both at the code level, with my microservices example, but also in terms of general management, in terms of virtually let people have a sense of ownership on what they do. All virtual works better than partial. I know a lot of you listening are probably wondering how to make hybrid environments work. Unfortunately, I don't have any experience in hybrid environments, since I've worked virtually almost pretty much all my life since university, and it's always been all virtual, starting with Ed Roman's first company, where he hired me, and we were distributed even way back in '99. But it's just easier to keep everyone informed when everyone's virtual. So if I had one bit of advice for companies that are hybrid, is to make sure your communication channels are consistent and they are virtual, because make sure that you're ready to put in the extra step of effort to keep the wider people informed of things that are happening in the office. And there's ways to do that. And I think that when I talk about consistent channels, I'm talking about things like having like organized ways that new ideas or thoughts or decisions are communicated. And some of those tools are like Slack and Yammer and things that are beyond email, things that I'll talk about shortly. Another kind of mindset thing, this kind of goes with results oriented. In a results oriented environment, in a virtual environment, like it's always easy to be diverse. It's even more easy to be diverse in a virtual group, because it's really, again, it's results oriented. And even when you're not even meeting the person you're hiring, it's really about qualifications. It's what it should be, right? This is how hiring should be, but it's virtually, it's somehow it's even easier. You kind of sidestep maybe some typical cognitive biases people might have. And this is a picture from my company. We're completely distributed across 5-6 countries, and it's pretty awesome. For those of you who want a quick cheat sheet, these are some of the minimal practices I think that you would need to run virtually. Those of you doing Agile and Scrum, of course, daily stand-ups, having weekly meetings. In those meetings where you review metrics, focusing on key things in the company. So key KPIs focused on key goals that the team has shared. And then I think statements, maybe a one-pager, could be a simple one-pager you update once a month or once a quarter of the group's purpose, values, and current key priorities. If you only do these things, then I think you could succeed virtually, because these are really foundations of a culture. And you might think, well, how can my subunit within the 1,000-person company have its own purpose, values, and key priorities? Well, why not? I mean, just make one up. You could be a small team of 5 within a company of 3,000 people, and just make up your own statement of purpose and what your subgroup values. And you'll see how it'll kind of bring people together. It may seem silly, but I think it's really important for creating a sense of fellowship. So now we're going to get into some of the details. So I mentioned key communications channels. What does it mean to be in the office when you're virtually? I think it means that you're visible in an IM tool, that you're online. And I think it's important, whether you're using Slack or Skype for this purpose, that you understand that. So being visible in the tool, it's almost like hovering over your cube and seeing people in the office. It lowers the barrier to talk to them, to reach out, but also signals if someone's not online, don't bug them, because if they're not online, they're not working. And if you're going to reach out to them when they're not online, make sure you have a very good reason for it. And this, again, this is almost a signal. It's an API it's like an API call that I'm available if you're seen online. And so that's the way we use instant messaging. So overall, of course, as developers, you're all familiar with using wikis for reference material. We use Google Docs for anything that's kind of more temporal or project-based. I mentioned about synchronous versus asynchronous. And what about a social network? So Yammer is something that we use internally, but you could also use a private Facebook group for your group. You could use, obviously, certain Slack channels are more water cooler-like that you can use this way. Frankly, I really dislike that Slack isn't threaded. It's one of the reasons why we haven't switched to it. What I like about Yammer or things that have a social network metaphor for the communication style is that it's understood that it's asynchronous, that you can look there every few days and just catch up. It's the feed paradigm. So these are excerpts of real posts to our Yammer network that span everything from development to vacations and stuff like that. So having a social network, I think, is important in a virtual team to capture things that are kind of too small and too fine-grained for the formality of email. And there's really no place to kind of put that, right? It's the water cooler. So it's, like you want to post small 3-4 second updates about 3-4 line updates about interesting things that have happened. Where are you going to put it? And where do you put ideas? How do you communicate small bits of updates that are important from one project to another? So I think that's important for a virtual team to have a social network. And for those of you in hybrid environments, this also can be really helpful, because if everyone knows that that's where they should be looking to kind of get a sense of what's going on, then that kind of solves the sense of isolation or the sense of not knowing what's going on. Not knowing what's going on is probably one of the biggest kind of poisons in a hybrid environment, or really any kind of environment, really. So if you build a culture internally that small updates or small decisions or things that are so small that you wouldn't write a formal email about get posted to your social network, then you've kind of solved that problem. But it really takes a discipline and really takes everyone to get engaged to be posting in that manner, to keep everyone informed. So I think that's a really big thing, and I'm here talking about social networks, but I really feel that it's that important. So some of the do's and don'ts that I communicate for my own internal team, like share successes, acknowledge your peers, small updates. I mentioned things too small or personal for email, but some of the don'ts is it's not for urgent problem solving. It really keep it asynchronous, right? Keep it something that is something that's kind of fun and informative to use, and make sure that the channels like email, or if you have perhaps certain Slack channels for solving problems, that those are clearly delineated as different from your use of an internal social network. So it's not read required. So kind of when you're posting things, expect that anything that's read required might be marked in a different way, or written out in a different medium. Another foundational tool is having some kind of situational room or dashboard. So for dev teams, we're very familiar with Kanbans. That's a good visualization. Here's a objectives dashboard that we've used internally. So it's just a Google sheet. There's the objective, who's accountable for it, and there's each column of those colors are weekly updates. So what's going on each week, you just color it red, yellow, or green. That's been really useful for us internally. That's kind of a foundation of how we structure our team management. So you can imagine this, obviously, this could port as well to development, more higher level priorities. Could be visualized this way as well. It's just an indicator. This is an example of a dashboard the QCon committees use to track, who's kind of speaking which track. We update it. We look at it every week. Here's another scoreboard for example, the writers of InfoQ.com. Kind of, we've created the scoreboard to mirror the different topics we write about, and once a month we track how we're doing to those topics. There's another scoreboard. So being creative with creating dashboards and to visualize where the company's going and what's important for your group. Again, I mentioned trust and transparency, right? So create transparency on what's important, so it's visible by everyone in a consistent manner, and then people kind of know what's going on. They know what to focus on. So again, dashboards are important for alignment, for self-motivation. People have to self-report how they're doing on a weekly basis, and that's I think that's really a key pillar for a team to stay aligned. Next up, supporting dashboards is anything that creates metrics, situational awareness. A lot of ops teams will probably be ninjas with metrics dashboards, far more sophisticated than what I'm showing you here. But this is kind of a custom dashboard. A metrics dashboard you can create. So here's the editorial metrics for InfoQ from a while back, and it's just, again, what's the metric? What's the weekly number? You look at it with your team once a week or as often as you want. So actually having metrics, it seems like a basic thing, right? But if you're not tracking things that are important to you, then how does the team know what's going on? And I differentiate metrics dashboards, metrics from what I mentioned earlier, just dashboards overall, because there's a difference between what are the higher level priorities that like projects people are working on versus just watching metrics and key performance indicators. So the best metrics should be criteria for decision making. That's really important. If it's not really actionable, then why are you tracking it? It's also important to understand the difference between kind of leading and lagging indicators. So if one of your let's say your company's indicator is increased revenue, that's not a leading indicator, it's a lagging indicator. So you could ask why or how questions 5 times and get deeper to what are the real levers that will drive that number, and find the leading indicator. And then separating goals from your general kind of just keep the trains running, keep the boat afloat numbers. Make sure the goals are visible separately. So those are some examples of dashboards. Of course, you're all familiar with Kanbans. But one key wisdom I'll impart is that dashboards and metrics, they're only as useful as your meeting rhythms to review them. You can track so many different things. But if you're not actually looking at it as a group and discussing it, then what's the point? So I really feel that some companies can get into like a bit of a metrics frenzy, tracking all kinds of things, which never get looked at, never get actioned on. So what's the point? So really, any kind of, I think, unit of, I don't know, any kind of collection of numbers that make any sense for a team should be accompanied by some agenda item on some meeting, whether it's weekly or monthly, to look at it and learn together and take action. And of course, every individual should have accountability on any one particular number, because they might be looking at it more frequently because they're responsible for it. So I know that some friends of mine at Amazon mentioned that they have dashboards like this. They're tracking all kinds of operational and growth metrics related to the particular microservice that they run. And Netflix is the same. Each group has their own kind of dashboard, and they review it regularly and they learn from it. So meeting rhythms. I mentioned, of course, stand-ups. Hopefully you're all doing daily stand-ups. If you're not, then that's an important project to start, process to start. I mentioned having weekly department calls or project calls, and and quarterly planning. Just again, rhythms. Rhythms are such a crucial concept to get if you're leading a virtual company. What are the rhythms that keep people aligned? Because I mentioned earlier that it's an asynchronous world, right? So you can all go your separate ways and work on your stuff, but you have to come back together on a regular basis to realign and re-engage. And that's a way that you can get more of that low interrupt culture. So these are some of the rhythms that I advocate for. Stand-ups. I mean, many of you on this call are doing stand-ups. I like to think of stand-ups. One of the benefits that I'm not sure people think about a lot is that a stand-up is like a daily personal retrospective. It's just a way to think about what have I done and reflect on an individual basis. But virtually, they're so important because it's your sense of connectedness. It's your sense of feeling the people you work with and feeling connected to them daily, even if it's just for this 10-minute kind of routine thing. It lowers the barrier for reaching out to them. For example, after the call, they're there and you can say, hey, can I help you this, or can I ask you this? The fact that you're just touching base every day is really important. So my company, because we span so many time zones, we only do stand-ups on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And although some of the groups that are on the same time zone, they have been doing it daily. But I would say a minimum twice a week, if not daily. We use it's actually a slide I forgot to add here. In terms of tools for meetings, I'll just talk over it, and actually, just so I don't distract you, let's go to video. In terms of tools for your for meetups, I'm adding this to the talk live. We actually use one of the things that I think in real life, when you have a regularly scheduled meeting, you have to go to a room, right? Not real life, in a co-located office. You go to a room and you meet. And if someone's not there, you don't chase them down. You just focus on your meeting. So that's a paradigm in a virtual context that I wanted to replicate. How can we replicate people actually going to rooms? That's why I don't really like Skype for group calls. It's great for one-on-ones, but for group calls, I prefer to use. We actually use Hangouts ourselves. So we just have a bunch of public Hangouts, and we people just go to the same URL once a week for their weekly meetings, and we do that for our our QCon committees as well. So Hangouts is a great free method for doing departmental meetings. But there's tons of other tools out there like WebEx or whatever. But the usage paradigm, I think, is that you have to show up, as opposed to being called. And again, it just makes it mirror the way things kind of work in real life. So going back to the presentation. So some of the stand-up agendas, all of us know about, are we stuck and what have we done? But another cool addition is what are my priorities for today? I think that again helps from people's personal planning perspective. It's a habit that creates personal excellence. So why not add that to your stand-up agenda? Weekly department call. So one of the things we do is we have a personal check-in. We look at the numbers, again, looking at metrics dashboards, all the metrics that matter to that group. We talk about, has there been any feedback from customers? That usually only takes numbers takes 10 minutes, feedback takes 10 minutes, we discuss it. And then the last half hour, we go over any stuck points. Anyone need any help? So that's an important distinction, because stand-ups take care of your status, then your weekly calls can be about problem solving. And ideally, there's bottom-up problem solving. You encourage an environment where people are actually asking the group to help with solving one of their objectives or some issue that they have, as opposed to the manager pulling that information. So that's an example of the basic weekly status, not status, basic weekly agenda. I found that most departments actually need kind of two weekly meetings. There'll be one that's more on this format, which gives you your kind of operational awareness of what's going on with the team or company. And then there's another one that might be about whatever it is that your group or company does, like keeping the trains running. Like if you're a sales team, it might be looking at the pipelines. If you're a content organization like InfoQ, it's reviewing also your editorial pipelines. It's whatever the trackers you use to push widgets for whatever your group does. Maybe as a dev team, it's looking at recent commits or the status of the Kanban. That's kind of what that other call is. And this call is more medium-term stuff. Feedback, creating a culture of collecting feedback. So we post Yammer, then we go over them in our weekly meetings. That's really important. Another practice is weekly one-on-ones. So between manager and report, we use a tool called 15.5, and it's a tool that automates this kind of report format between a manager and an employee. So employees can answer these questions once a week, and for them it's a personal retrospective for the week, how to go, answering questions like how was your week, what have I learned, what needs to happen next week, and then the manager can respond, and you can be commenting Facebook style, and that's really interesting. And then you can have followers on the reports too, so people in the group can follow you. So that's a cool tool I recommend. But even the practice itself, I mean, if you're not using a tool like that, you can use other methods. I know a company that everyone will just email the answers to the questions like these into a Google group once a week, and that's transparent in front of everyone. Or you can just have a one-on-one call and just ask some of the same questions. So just again, overall, you got stand-ups for your daily status, daily retrospective. You got your weekly department calls for overall operational alignment and problem solving, and your weekly one-on-ones, which is for personal retrospective. So these are, again, some of the underpinnings of running well virtually. Having annual and quarterly planning rhythms, that's really important. So actually getting together once a year and setting your plan for the next year. These are from my own company from a few years ago. Having quarterly objectives. What are we focused on this quarter? That's, again, it's and then taking those objectives, putting them on a dashboard, which you look at weekly. So all of this, it all goes together, hand in hand, so people know what's going on. So a lot of things I'm saying here are structures to keep people focused on what's important and keep people fully aligned on what's going on. And so again, it's about creating transparency, creating engagement, creating happiness. So those of you who have quarterly objective planning, I won't go over this. But then it's important to have a quarterly review where you look at these higher level concepts of what's going on in the company. It's a rhythm, right? You have daily rhythms, weekly rhythms. You can have a monthly rhythm looking at higher level numbers and metrics, and a quarterly rhythm, which is more key projects, what's going on. And then you can have quarterly themes if you'd like to take it to the next level. So all these practices collectively can give you a sense of super transparency. So one of my team members says that they know more about what their colleagues are doing in this company than they knew back when someone worked in the next cube. They know more about what their team member is doing. It's because we've created these transparency tools. Also, I think having annual all-hands meetings. Every year we go to a different place. If you're all virtual, that helps. If you're co-located, obviously you can just meet locally. And then, of course, regular face-to-face meetings. When do you have those? I think it's really important when you're onboarding someone, like when you're hiring someone. I think it's very important that they spend a couple days with you. And another thing for hiring is to schedule a daily, check-in, like maybe 30 minutes for the first month or two that they've been joined to the company. And the agenda of that check-in is for them to pull questions from you, whatever that they may need to be more effective in their job. So it's really about creating availability for them when they've been hired. So that's kind of the rhythms part of the talk. Next is, I mentioned core values. So I think great teams hire and fire by their core values. This is what gets you to stage 4. This is what gets you to a situation where you have a sense of shared expectations of what, you have a shared sense of normal. It's because you have a sense of core values and you're talking about your core values. These are the core values of my company. We have mastering, transparency, integrity, accountability, and service. You can have ones that are more sentences, like, I don't know, we believe in clean code might be a core value or something like that. But these are the shared notions of what normal means in your company. But if you just put them on paper and never look at them, then that's just wishful thinking. You really need a method for talking about them. So for example, on Yammer, but you can also do this on Slack. We have a culture of acknowledging each other when we see great examples of people embodying the core values. Those are those examples on the left. When we have our annual meetings, we do some games, like we create posters and we draw images, pictures from the last year of stories of the core values. We've had 56 core value acknowledgements in one quarter, which I think is always makes me proud when I see that. I mentioned the core value postering, but there's lots of different games you can invent to reinforce your core values on a regular basis. Now, in terms of virtual teams, I think some of the key values that really matter are anything that boils down to transparency. Again, you don't need to use these words. You can use sentences. You can use something that resonates for you, but something that involves that people have an openness and are willing to be fully transparent with everything, not just status, with how they feel, with what's going on. That's important. A sense of service. People should just like helping the team, like being productive, like doing interesting things, and a sense of accountability that people are really responsible for they'll stand by what they say they're going to do, and if they're not going to meet it, they'll tell you in advance. They'll keep the team informed. Accountability to the group. So you can have all the values you want, but at some point, I think these three are really important in a virtual team for it to work really smoothly. A sense of purpose. So again, those of you who are leading companies or teams, you might have you have the ability to set a sense of purpose. But I think even if you're in a small group in a bigger company, you could create one for your group. So for my company, software is changing the world. So we want to facilitate the spread of knowledge and innovation in software developments. So that way we're kind of helping trends be adopted faster. And that's kind of our way of, that's our contribution to the world for InfoQ and QCon. A lot of companies have great purposes. These are some from some companies you might be familiar with, but they don't have to be lofty, right? So Walt Disney, make people happy, or Zappos, delivering happiness. It's whatever your team stands for, and that's what I mean by when I say that your group, even if you're in a big company, you could make something that you all kind of align with, and make that the purpose for your group. I love this quote from Mark Zuckerberg. You need to do stuff you're passionate about. Companies that work are the ones that people really care about and have a vision for the world. So do something you like. So just to kind of conclude, good culture can be consciously designed. So be a culture hacker. Own the feeling you're creating. And this, again, comes down to being aligned and committed to certain structures and practices for your group. So that's it. I can stop now and we can go into Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Floyd. That was a
Okay.
wonderful talk. Really learned a lot. And our audience has been furiously asking questions as you've been speaking.
And I can't see the questions, everyone, so I wasn't ignoring you.
So the number one question with 218 votes comes from Nikos Patikas. And Nikos asks, how do you estimate the timeline for a task that you are not familiar with? And this is actually a really good question. This has come up a lot in my life. Because on the one hand, you're committing to something. You don't really know how to estimate that, and it's a new task for you. So how do you go about solving that?
I'd be the wrong person to ask that question. I'm a famous underestimator. So unfortunately, I'm not the expert on that. I think that's a really question for an Agile expert. I do think one bit of value I'll share is that I don't think people put enough effort on the brainstorm process when they're taking on a task or planning some kind of project. So I think brainstorming is a distinctly different step in the project planning process, allowing yourself to identify the moving parts, map it out. What does this mean? What is that? Just without even trying to put things in order to create a timeline, just brainstorm enough. And I think if we do that, we'll have a big clearer picture of even what the questions are that we should be asking ourselves when we take on a new project or task. So that's the one bit of wisdom I'll give in answer to that, because yeah, anything beyond that, it's obviously would be very case by case specific.
Okay, great. So then next question, how could one keep up with all the new languages and frameworks being released in such a fast pace?
Read infoq.com, come to QCon. Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously that didn't mean that to be a self-serving comment, but are you reading InfoQ? Are you reading Hacker News? Are you following these sources of trends? Are you looking at what's being talked about at conferences like QCon or other conferences around the world? That's kind of a lens on what's important, what matters, right? Are you looking at what are some of the top discussed topics on Stack Overflow? So yeah, and I think that's and at the end of the day, I think we have to choose to be an expert at a few things. Maybe we can't master everything. So if you're following a trend really closely, then I think you'll know where to look.
Great. Okay, next question. Is there nowadays a bigger demand on the market for full stack developers?
I think so, and the reason is that with the revolution we're seeing within IT, wow, that sounds so corporate. What I mean is pretty much every small business now can have a software strategy, and the ones that don't are going to be left behind. So the ones that don't, guess what? Whatever website they need or whatever tools that they're going to use, they're not going to be able to afford a big consulting company. They're going to want smaller groups building exactly what they need. I mean, every company, small companies want apps now too, and wants IT automation. So I do think that I mean, it depends really what kind of sector you want to be in. If you want to do lots of small projects, I think being full stack is really important. Of course, there's a room for specialization. You could be a big data scientist or focus more on backend Java. I think Java is still a safe bet even this year, focusing on mastering that and being an awesome server-side developer. There's just software development is literally exploding, and there's an opportunity to specialize and stay focused on one thing and stay up with the trends on that one thing and be gainfully employed for the rest of your life. And that's not going to go away. But I guess to answer the question specifically, if you do like doing consulting or working on lots of small projects, I think being full stack is really helpful. And at the end of the day, no one's going to, I think being full stack helps in any job interview as well, because you have a more well-rounded resume and you understand things from end to end.
Okay, great. Let's come back to the audience questions in a second here. We're going to go to the polls to see, learn more about our audience. So I started to ask them some questions during your presentation. So the first question is, do you work on a virtual team? So it looks like 61% of our audience does work on a virtual team, and 38.8% does. 38% does work, and 61% does not work on a virtual team. So most people work on a traditional team, but about a third of them are virtual.
Awesome.
And then do you use Slack daily? So about half the people do, and about half the people don't. That's pretty interesting. Like, that's pretty crazy penetration there.
Yeah. Although it's funny because for my company, our dev team uses Slack, and the rest of the company uses Skype. And I've been thinking about ways that Skype could emulate Slack. If Slack implemented like video calling, we probably switched fully in a second. But in Skype, you can just create named groups for discussions, and basically you get very similar features to Slack, at least for chat channel purposes. But I think those who are using Slack, I don't think Slack is a replacement for having a social networking tool, just to capture more just smaller bits of information back and forth. Get threading. Wow, threading, what a concept. So I still suggest Slack teams consider using something like Facebook for Work or Yammer or something like that.
Now, do you see this whole space coalescing over time? Like, do you think Slack will eventually do a lot of this stuff?
I hope so. But it would be kind of a different paradigm, right? If Slack implemented a feed metaphor, that would be game changer. I'd be so happy if they did that. This whole IRC-like interface just bugs me.
All right, Stuart Butterfield, CEO of Slack, you heard this today from Floyd Marinescu. So, all right, next question. So as you were talking about kind of an interrupt-driven day and the idea of turning off these interrupts, I asked the audience, do you allow interrupts? And 87% do allow interrupts, and 13.5% have them disabled. So what do you think about that, Floyd?
It's good to know that so many people don't allow interrupts.
No,
but I think
13% do not allow interrupts.
Do not. That's right.
86% do allow interrupts.
Well, I think allowing interrupts is good as long as you have the culture and discipline to be careful about what are people interrupting each other for. So again, I mentioned asynchronous versus synchronous. If people are interrupting you for good reason because they need an answer right now, that's cool. But if they're interrupting you just to show you a picture of their cat or to ask you a question that they could have asked you next week on a planning call, that's not a good not a good interrupt. So it really depends on what culture you've created. Again, culture is your shared model of normal. So what is normal with regards to interrupts? That's my question to the audience.
Well, GitHub's culture was built around a cat. So showing a picture of a cat at GitHub may be acceptable. And they are virtual, by the way. So let's see. Next question we asked the audience, do you ever worry, this is kind of an interesting kind of psychology question. Do you ever worry what people might think about you if you aren't seen, quote unquote, as being online in Slack? Meaning, are you worried about what your coworkers will think about you if they don't see you as being online? And about 122 people, so 28% said yes, I would worry about that. And about 2/3 of the audience said no, they don't worry about that.
I worry about it personally because I want to be seen present, and I think it kind of affects the culture, right? Again, it's about what culture do you want to set. If you want to create a norm that being online means you're available, then it's useful to have that understanding that you're working if you're online. But if you're creating and you're explicitly not working if you're not online, or you're in transit, maybe you're going to a conference or something, and your immediate teammates know that you've gone to a conference, so there's no expectations there. But if you're in an office, if you're at work, you got to be available for your peers, right? I mean, we're working together as a team. So it really depends on what's the cultural norm that you've set, because maybe in your culture, not being visible online doesn't mean anything. That's cool. It really depends on what's the norm that you've agreed on.
Well, I have a lot of respect for our audience members who are honest with that answer. This is one of the nice things about these real-time polls. Since they're anonymous, it really gives us the opportunity to be honest and to not be singled out and to actually see what life is really like. So it's pretty cool to see that. So last two questions. One is your team metrics driven? 77% are not metrics driven.
Wow. So this is fun. I like this. Those of you who are not metrics driven, well, I'd challenge that, because if you're deploying code, that is a metric. So maybe you're tracking, I don't know, time versus story points, or what you've committed on a 2 weeks basis. So I would challenge you to consider that there are metrics in play, whether they're written down or not. And if they're not written down, then there's a chance that there's a lot of there could be disagreement, there could be misalignment, and frankly, it's hard to know if you're successful. So wouldn't it be better if they're written down? If you can't pull your manager and agree on a set of metrics for the team, then I would say that's maybe not a well-managed team. So I challenge everyone to have discussions about what are the KPIs that really matter, because the best KPIs, they're not hammers, they're not used against you. The best KPIs allow you to make a realistic commitment and aligns the team on what's important, and brings clarity. And I think you've seen a theme of this whole talk was transparency and clarity and alignment are important to work virtually in virtual groups.
And what if you're a little team, Floyd? Like, what if you're just 2 or 3 people doing a project together? Maybe a startup co-founding team, or maybe it's a project within a company, and it's just in the early phases. Can you even be metrics driven at that phase?
Well, if nothing's public yet, if you're not talking to customers, well, it depends what phase you're in, I guess. If it's literally just 3 developers just coding, I would say having a timeline is a metric, right? Like you've committed to something on a certain calendar, that you've already got some kind of metric. So setting retrospective points between now and then, essentially you're discussing metrics without having written them down. It is a kind of a metric. So I would challenge you to think about, again, what are the leading indicators for that lagging indicator? So what needs to happen now to affect that end goal that you're trying to set, and measure that? And again, I think metrics will set you free.
Very well said. Okay, then the last poll we did, does your team conduct daily stand-ups? And slightly more than half do conduct daily stand-ups. And I'm assuming that from some of the people who said no, maybe they conduct weekly stand-ups. So, you know, we got some pretty good numbers there.
Yeah, I would argue that a weekly stand-up is boring because they end up being going on and on about status, and also it's just less engaging, right? It's like, are we like excited about what we're doing? Are we committed to something? Just why not connect daily, or my company is twice weekly, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and just do a quick share about what's going on. Because if you don't, then your weekly call will end up being long and be boring, and I think could be too long. I mean, it turns into 1 hour status call instead of a 10-minute check-in.
You know,
But again, it's all case by case, right? So everything I'm saying, please, it's case by case.
No, I agree with you. Actually, I found that that works really well for accountability purposes as well. It keeps people on the right rhythm. At Pivotal Labs, for example, I've stopped by and participated in their daily stand-ups, and it's pretty inspiring. Everyone kind of gathers around a monitor together, reviews the KPIs, reviews the key objectives, the issues, and all that, and it really does bring the team together. So I'm a big believer in it. And the other, there's a side benefit too, which is, and this is kind of a weird side benefit, but by having daily stand-ups at a certain time, it kind of forces developers to work at similar times.
Yes, that's important.
Really nice because then they can ask each other questions, and if they get stuck, someone else can help them. And if developers are all working crazy different hours, which is very easy to do in a virtual environment with different time zones, then it becomes much more challenging to have overlap, and that's where productivity starts to get lost because people get stuck using someone else's library or API, or there's an assumption they don't understand.
So for my company, because we span California to Eastern Europe, for some of the core functions, people that span that group, I find that 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern tends to work, or like let's say 9:30 to 11 Eastern. That spans, I guess, 8 a.m. Pacific all the way up to to 6 p.m. in Eastern Europe. If you're communicating with China, luckily if you're in California, it's easy because you got your late afternoon open, and that's morning for them. So it's those are kind of the two rhythms that tend to affect people, right?
Absolutely. Great. Well, Floyd, I want to thank you. We're just about out of time here, but in closing comments, I want to really acknowledge you for being here and helping our audience learn from your experiences. It was really useful. And if you enjoyed what Floyd had to say today, please consider making a donation to one of our nonprofits through the button on our user interface. We'd really appreciate that. You'll be helping good causes, and you'll be helping other people become stronger programmers through that donation. And also, we'd love for you to check out the open source project, the Hack Guides. We'd love feedback on that, or for any contributions you guys want to make towards helping spread knowledge throughout the developer community. It's all free. It's open source. So Floyd, are you available for a few minutes to answer one-on-one questions from our audience if they want to join you in the Hangout?
I'd love to.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that into the chat window in a few seconds here. Floyd, thanks again for being here today.
Okay, thank you.